Good morning, everyone. Here we are with Robbie Powers and me, Eliana. We will be presenting about overview of immigration agencies. Ruby Powers is a board-certified immigration and nationality attorney. She has been working with law immigration since 13 years now. So thank you so much, Ruby, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Eliana. Yeah, the firm's 13 years old, and I've been practicing 14, but I actually worked in immigration even before that. And funny enough, one of the first slides, I'm going to mention that. So today we're going to be talking about the overview of immigration agencies. And this might, not interest everybody, but for some people, they might be like, that's interesting. Because really, when we're talking about immigration, some people say, oh, there hasn't been laws passed in a long time. That's actually very true. But what happens is there's a lot of different agencies, and they all have different amounts of power that they've been provided. And so there's their interpretation and policies and procedures as to how they execute that power. So the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2003 in more or less like in reaction and after the events of 9/11 here in the United States. And what it did is it brought together, I think it was about almost 26 agencies under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security. And I remember this because I lived in Austin during 9/11, and I moved to DC soon after. And I worked for the Committee on Homeland Security for the House side soon in 2004, soon after DHS was created. So it has a lot of sub agencies, including, which is where immigration comes into play, USCIS, which is the Citizenship and Immigration Services, Customs and Border Patrol, and Immigration Customs Enforcement and Ombudsman's Office. So USCIS has lots of offices, lots of service centers. And we might not be including all of them because they're like growing and they're huge. There's a lot going on, but they have the Vermont Service Center, which generally holds a lot of the Violence Against Women Act or humanitarian, very sensitive data information. Texas Service in California, and there's other ones. Then there's also the district offices, and so in Houston we have a really big office. Dallas has one. San Antonio does. But around the country, not every, it's usually where there's a lot of immigrants and there's a lot of processing happening. And sometimes people have to drive farther to go to the closest USCIS office for interviews. But sometimes when there's more immigrants in that area, then they eventually open up an office in that region. So there's really USCIS is the one that would adjudicate things like your naturalization or your green card interview, adjustment of status and things like that. So they also do humanitarian benefits like TPS, asylum, and depending on what they estimate the amount of work is needed on their side, that will reflect their filing fee. So sometimes you can apply for fee waivers, and sometimes for humanitarian matters like asylum and like VAWA, there's not a filing fee. So they do adjust they're supposed to be primarily based off of fees. And premium processing, which is when they usually charge around 2,500 to get a decision faster, is where they make up for their lost funding and sort of helps them out. During the Trump administration, there was a lot of reduction of premium processing, and under the Biden administration, they've been ramping it up, but in phases so that they can actually accommodate and meet the demand of the clients. So anyway, they do re-examine those fees on a regular basis. Honestly, I've been doing this so long, I can't remember the last time they went up the filing fees, but there's always a big rush to file before the fees go into effect. So you could be encountering USCIS for employment-based visas, family-based preferences, to have your interview, or if you're getting a copy of your private applications with them by requesting a Freedom Information Act request. And if you have an attorney represent you, then they would submit a G-28 form. The funny thing is that in the visa space, there's all these letters and numbers, and it sort of seems like really crazy. And when we as immigration attorneys or professionals talk about it, we're just spitting out all these little jargon like 130 and in 400 and in 336 and all this stuff. And if you're in this business, you know what those things are. But if you're not, then you're like, what are you talking about? So another agency within Department of Homeland Security is Immigration Customs Enforcement. They're focusing on the workplace enforcement audits. There's enforcement and removal operations. And those agents arrest and detain immigrants charged with violating immigration law. ICE's mission is responsible for immigration enforcement activities within the United States. So they also, in reaction to 9/11, they created a program called SEVIS or SEVIS, depending on how you pronounce it. And it's a federal database of managing the F1, J1, M1 visitors. And I actually worked at the international office at University of Texas in Austin back in 2001. So I saw this before SEVIS was created. So SEVIS basically is a way that the schools, the international student officers, can make notes in the count whether or not the F1, J1, M1 visitors are actually meeting the requirements of their school education, or if they are no longer going to school. And sometimes there's exceptions, etc. And then those that's in the database. And so then ICE can act if necessary if someone is not meeting their visa requirements. So you could be there's lots of different interactions that could possibly happen with ICE. That you might also need to apply for administrative stay of removal while you're to prevent a deportation. But generally, there's lots of different facets. The other office that's under ICE is Office of Principal Legal Advisor, and they are working on preserving the laws of the U.S. and making sure that the government's perspective is being heard and seen in a court case. And so they also follow policies and case law depending on what they are at the time. And so if you hear the word OPLA, that's what we're talking about. Now, if you hear of Customs and Border Protection, CBP, they make an admissibility determinations at ports of entry. A person needs to be inspected and admitted, paroled. They can deny admission. So like if someone comes in on a tourist visa and the CBP thinks that person has a one-way ticket, they don't have enough money on their pockets, and they don't look like they're going to leave, they could deny that tourist visa and send them back home. So they have a lot of power at ports of entry and in deferred inspection. So you might encounter them when you're talking about admission, seeking admission, or when you're in secondary inspection at an airport or a port of some sort. You might be correct when you're correcting the I-94 records. Sometimes those are wrong. Or if you're looking for records about your entries into the country. Canadians can actually seek admission on a TN or L1 with CBP. Now let's move over to another department called Department of State. So the Department of State, their headquarters in DC, they have a lot of different facets of them as well. The Visa Office Liaison, they legal opinions come through LegalNet. There's the National Visa Center, which is sort of like a clearinghouse that interacts between USCIS and Department of State and helps process documents en route and helps with the consular processing. And then there's the embassies and consulates, which you could be applying for a non-immigrant visa or an immigrant visa. And again, a non-immigrant visa is like your intention is just to come temporarily to the U.S., like a student, a tourist, or a short-term investor. But the immigrant is like married to a United States citizen or the child of a U.S. citizen wanting to stay in the U.S. With your immigrant intent. The National Visa Center is located in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and it's a really important location. A lot of our cases, most of our cases, the consular processing, they have to go through here, and they help process and be that middle person between USCIS and consulates to make sure things run smoothly. So if we have to do, if we file the USCIS petition here in the country and then the person's abroad and we need to do consular processing, it'll go through MVC. And we have to have enough of the documents ready to schedule the appointments at the embassies and consulates. So embassies and consulates can handle lots of different issues. There's U.S. Citizenship Services, which is usually to deal with like birth certificates or birth record abroad or marriage. Some very limited U.S. citizen services for those expats who are living abroad. The websites have a lot of information about what that embassy or consulate does. So that's a great resource. Hopefully they've updated it and they have really detailed information. After COVID, a lot of consulates embassies were limited services or down for a while, and they're still just haven't gone to full force. Some of them have, but not all of them. And so you really have to check on that. Back in the day, attorneys were allowed to go to these appointments, but not anymore. So it's we prep our clients before they go with everything we know. And I've done tours of embassy before, but for the most part, we aren't going them with our client. A lot of consulates embassies have their own rules and preferences, so you really want to read their website to find out what they like and what they don't like. You might also be dealing with something where there's a denial of a visa or for some different reason, and you have to do some type of advocacy. So let's move over to the Department of Justice, which is a whole nother department, and so it's led by Merrick Garland, our Attorney General, and they're in charge of enforcing laws and defending the interests of the United States. So they can have memos and decisions binding upon Department of Homeland Security and other agencies. They contribute to U.S. policy on immigration. When we have case law, we use case law to determine what is the guiding principles at the time. I was in court a lot the last 2 weeks, and we pretty much had to double check what does the case law say that moment, which is crazy because you prepare these cases over the course of 4, 5, 10, 12 years, and it could completely hinge on what's current at that moment of the day of the hearing. There were a lot of changes between the Trump administration under Barr and Sessions and all the attorney generals that were under that administration compared to the Biden's Department of Justice. So there's been a bit of a reversal, and that's been greatly appreciated by immigrants. So encountering Department of Justice could be, and this is where we see it mostly, Executive Office of Immigration Review, EOIR. That's in charge of court, and that's where the judges are, and that's where we file with the courts. So there also is the Office of Chief Counsel, Board of Immigration Appeals, Office of Chief Administration Hearing. There's a lot of other subsections, but under the Executive Office of Immigration Review, this is where we have trials for immigration court. It's technically federal. It's federal court, but immigration judges are not Article III judges and are hired by the Department of Justice and not appointed. So it's a bit different than the Article I judges, even though there's been a push to try to make it more independent in Article I courts, but it's not. So you could apply for different forms of relief under immigration court. And it's a little bit more detailed, but generally it could be like asylum, bond hearings, cancellation or removal, adjustment of status, motions to reopen. So this is generally what we file or appeals waivers. The Board of Immigration Appeals oversees the decisions of immigration judges. I actually read a stat, like a lot of cases are appealed. And appeals can take anywhere from like maybe 1 or 2 years. They are the only appellate court with jurisdiction over immigration judge decisions. They're located in Falls Church, Virginia. So if you don't like the judge's decision, you appeal to the BIA. If you don't like their decision, then you would have to go to your circuit court. Now, again, it takes a lot of energy, funds, and you would want to have some good case law to move forward to that. So let's go to one of our last ones, Department of Labor. Yes, there's another one, right? So they are in charge of prevailing wage determinations when we're talking about like perm cases. They're also the ones that help oversee the H-2A and H-2B, the farm worker and agriculture, non-skilled workers. There's also the labor condition applications with H-1B and wage and hour division. So there's a lot under here, Department of Labor. So how many, pop quiz, how many agencies, departments did we talk about? We talked about Department of Labor, Department of Justice, Department of State, and Department of Homeland Security. Yeah, a lot, right? And there's a lot within the Department of Justice. So we have to pay attention to all of the departments and see what they're doing and what they feel like that day and what their policies are. And sometimes when there's a conflict between the departments, agencies, then it can take a little while to get it resolved. Sometimes if you get stuck in between them, one says do talk to this person, then they say talk to this person. You ping pong a little bit beyond those, between those. But for the most part, if you know what you're doing, you can try to get a result at some point. But anyway, that's why immigration is so much fun, because there's lots of different agencies and there's a lot of different roles and responsibilities. So
Ruby,
that's my summary.
Sorry to bother you. Before we finish, we have a question from one person. So
okay.
Asking, hi, I crossed the border from Mexico to USA with inspection. I was jailed about 5 months. It was 4 years ago. My asylum is pending. I get my work authorization card, and I was working 2 years ago. I got marriage.
Okay. So the question is, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, so they probably entered without inspection, and then they have asylum pending. If they got married to a U.S. citizen, the U.S. citizen could apply for them and file an I-130. Still would have to get them out of court and see what we could do about a waiver for unlawful presence. And depending if they can get out of court, wouldn't need a waiver for court or deportation order. The detained for 5 months part, we just need to double check what happened there. But it's every case can be very unique, but that's some of the issues that I see there. Just because if you enter without inspection and you marry a U.S. citizen doesn't mean it solves all your problems. You still might have some other inadmissibility, and you might have to consular process, which could be complicated if you have to return to the country that you fear. So you might have to try to go through another country. So I would just suggest they have a consultation, and we can go into more detail, and they can bring as much information as they have. Then we can give them a better answer on the spot. But yeah, I mean, that's where example of how it can be complicated, because that individual probably interacted with CBP, Department of Justice under EOIR, and probably USCIS in some capacity. Maybe they had a credible fear interview, or with the part of the processing of the USCIS for the I-589. So that's why we wanted to do this presentation today, to explain all the different agencies that interact with immigration. So what do we have the rest of the month? I can't believe we're halfway done with August.
Yeah, so we already did TPS for Venezuela's TN visas overview of immigration agencies today. So we have left what happens if I overstay my visa for next week. And then we have affirmative asylum. So if you want to check the previous ones, you can go through all of our pages and Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn, so you can find previous lives. So thank you so much. And then you have all the information where you can find Ruby. And also if you need some advice or problem with immigration issues, you can contact her and then get an interview with her.
Yeah, and we have other attorneys as well for consultations. So we have availability 8:30 to 5:30 Central Time, and sometimes Saturdays, Monday to Friday. And if you want to, you can join get added to our newsletter in English and Spanish, and it gives you updates on what's going on in immigration, so you can see the quick summary. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll be doing this again on Friday in Spanish for those who want to hear it in Spanish.
Thank you so much.
Bye.